The blood trail led straight to his water well. Tobias Hartwell had lived through dust storms, droughts, and the kind of loneliness that gnawed on a man's bones. In 37 years, he'd seen enough wounded livestock to know what deer blood looked like, and this wasn't it. The droplets were too dark, too heavy, too human. He followed them around the back of the barn rifle in hand boots crunching against the dry soil of his godforsaken ranch. He expected trouble. What he found stopped him cold. Crumbled against the rough stone wall of his well lay a young Indian warrior, blood soaking his side, one hand pressed tight against the wound, the other reaching almost pitifully toward the wooden bucket that hung 3 feet above his head. His chest heaved in short, ragged gasps, and his dark eyes locked on Tobias with the kind of fierce alertness that only came when a man had already stared death in the face and expected it to return soon. This was 1847, and a sight like this didn't mean mercy. It meant trouble. The kind of trouble that ended with a ranch in flames, a bullet through the heart, or worse, a scalping by torchlight. Every neighbor for 50 miles would tell Tobias the same thing. Don't ask questions. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Put a bullet in the savage's skull, bury him deep, and tell no one. Tobias raised his rifle. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was a practical one. Out here, mercy got you killed. The warrior didn't plead. He didn't beg. But his gaze, those eyes weren't filled with hate or even fear. What Tobias saw was something rawer, something painfully familiar. Thirst. Not the kind that comes from skipping a drink on a warm afternoon, but the kind Tobias had known himself during the drought of 44 3 days without water, lips split tongue like leather, and the quiet understanding that you might die if you didn't find a drink soon. That same desperate thirst crossed boundaries of skin, language, and war. It was human. The Indian's lips cracked open, dry and bleeding. One word escaped water, and in that instant the trigger never pulled. Tobias lowered the rifle. He could already hear what they'd say about him. Fool, they'd mutter. Gone soft. Frontier's gotten to him. His brother, back east, would say he'd lost his mind. Maybe they were all right, but Tobias didn't care. Not anymore. He knelt beside the wounded man and lifted the bucket from the well. The wooden rim was still damp when he pressed it to the warrior's lips. The man drank like he'd been saved from drowning. 3 full buckets before his trembling hands could even hold the rim steady. And still, Tobias watched heart-pounding thoughts racing. What the hell had he just done? Helping an Indian in this territory was like carving your own gravestone. As color returned to the warrior's face, Tobias noticed something that made his stomach twist. The wound in his side wasn't from a wild animal. It was a bullet hole. Close range, fresh, still bleeding. Gunpowder burns darkened the skin around it. Someone had shot this man recently, and, judging by the direction of the blood trail, they might still be tracking him. To Tobias. The warrior, now more alert, must have sensed his fear. Slowly, painfully, he raised a hand and pointed toward the horizon. Then he drew his thumb across his throat. Danger. Coming. Soon. Tobias's instincts screamed. He should drag this man off his land, cover the blood trail, pretend none of it ever happened. But the Indian could barely sit up. Moving him might kill him. Leaving him exposed would certainly do the same. Then came the sound, the one that had kept Tobias alive through 12 years of frontier life. Hoof beats, fast, hard, many. The Indian heard it too. His eyes went wide and he shrank against the well blood spilling anew from the wound he tried to stanch. Panic bled through Tobias's skin like sweat. He grabbed the empty bucket and sloshed water across the blood trail. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The riders would be here in minutes. Tobias looked down at the stranger who had, in the span of a single afternoon, turned his quiet life inside out. He could die for this. But still, the man looked up at him not with fear, but gratitude. Human, pure gratitude. And Tobias made his choice. He couldn't carry the man, but he could hide him, the old root cellar behind the barn, if they could make it. He reached down to help, but the Indian grabbed his wrist and smiled. Not the smile of someone being saved, the smile of someone who knew exactly who was coming and why. Tobias hadn't even lifted the wounded man before the hoofbeats came loud, fast, and angry. 6 horses crested the ridge like a dust storm with fury in their wake. At the head rode a man Tobias recognized instantly, and his heart missed a beat. Marshal Dixon Webb, a name that could silence an entire town. A lawman whose hands had drawn more blood than writs, who believed justice was loaded 6 rounds at a time and spoken in gunpowder. Webb didn't wait. He didn't ask. And he certainly didn't show mercy, especially not to Indians. Webb yanked his horse to a stop in front of Tobias, those cold steel-gray eyes raking over the sweat-drenched face of the rancher. The 5 other riders fanned out into a semicircle, hands resting casually, but not too casually, on their weapons. No greetings, no small talk, only purpose. After noon, Hartwell Webb drawled, voice like oil over rusted iron. "We're tracking a wounded Indian. Blood trail leads straight to your property." Tobias swallowed hard. I haven't seen anyone. Been working on the south fence all day." Webb didn't blink. He dismounted, every move slow and deliberate, like a predator testing the wind. His gaze fell on the stained dirt near the well, still damp from the last bucket Tobias had tried to wash it with. "Unless you've been butchering cattle next to your drinking water," Webb muttered, "that sure looks like blood." He took 3 steps forward. His hand settled on his holster. Tobias stood tall in front of the well, sweat pouring down his back. If Ayanna moved, groaned, or even breathed too loud, it would all be over. Then something impossible happened. A voice spoke from behind the stone wall. Not in English, but in Apache, soft as wind, sharp as flint. The syllables rolled like distant thunder. Webb froze mid-step like he'd seen a ghost. "Dear God," he whispered, "it's him." Immediately, the 5 deputies dismounted. Their hands dropped from their pistols, not to draw, but in awe. Not the fear of a threat, but of a truth too big to ignore. Tobias turned. Ayanna stood, despite the blood soaking his shirt. He leaned against the stone wall, unshaken eyes never leaving Webb. His voice, when it came, was English, calm, clear, and unmistakable. "Tell him who I am," Webb, Ayanna said. "Tell him why you came here ready to kill." Webb's lips barely moved. "This is Ayanna, son of Chief Takakota, the man who negotiated the peace treaty with Fort Richardson." Tobias felt the ground tilt beneath him. He hadn't just saved a wounded man. He'd saved a man whose life could change the fate of an entire territory. "But if you're the peacemaker," Tobias asked, voice dry, "why are you being hunted like a dog?" Ayanna's eyes darkened. 3 days ago, I was meeting with Colonel Morrison. We were expanding the treaty to include the southern tribes. But Morrison, he didn't walk out of that meeting. He paused. He was shot, from behind, during a staged Indian attack. Webb's jaw tightened. "It wasn't my people," Ayanna continued. "It was men in war paint, speaking Apache, pretending. It was a trap, and I was the target." Tobias's head reeled. An assassination, a political setup, a war in the making, and he, just a rancher with a bucket, was standing in the eye of it. "Do you have proof?" Tobias asked. Ayanna nodded. He pulled a blood-stained letter from a leather pouch. Morrison's own words, written the night before he died. Names, dates, amounts, evidence of men selling guns to rogue tribes, and a name from the marshal's office. Webb flinched fingers tightening around his gun. "You're accusing the government," he hissed. "That's treason." "And that's why they want me dead before tomorrow," Ayanna said, "before I can reach the Apache Council and reveal the truth." Tobias's breath caught. He wasn't helping a stranger anymore. He was standing between war and peace, between silence and justice, and the wind shifted. No, not the wind. Hoof beats. More this time. Heavier. Closer. Webb heard it too. His face turned white. How many Ayannas smiled through the pain. Enough. The confrontation with Marshal Webb. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, steady, thunderous, and undeniable. Not 3, not 5, dozens, maybe more. Webb snapped his head toward the horizon, eyes narrowing. "You called them here," he growled, panic tightening in his voice. "You lured me into a trap." Tobias tightened his fists. "He just asked for water. I didn't know anything about a trap." Webb drew his gun, the steel of his Colt catching the light. "You know now." Ayanna, still leaning against the well, didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, unafraid, unwavering. He held up the letter from Colonel Morrison. "This is why they want me dead," he said. "Morrison found out who's been selling guns to the renegade tribes, who's been taking bribes to look the other way. Every shipment, every payment, including you, Marshal Webb." The air thickened like a storm waiting to strike. The deputies, 5 men who once rode at Webb's back without question, glanced at one another, uncertainty creeping into their eyes. One of them, the youngest, maybe his name was Bradley, nudged his horse forward a step. "Marshal, is that true?" Webb spun around. "Shut your damn mouth." But Tobias saw it then. The crack, the doubt, and in that doubt was a flicker of resistance. Ayanna pressed on. "Colonel Morrison knew he was walking into danger," he said. "That's why he gave me this letter. He told me if he didn't make it out alive, I had to bring it to the Apache Council. It contains enough to hang a dozen men and expose everyone who's been fueling this war." Webb stepped closer, gun aimed squarely at Ayanna. "Give it to me, so you can burn it." Ayanna shook his head. "I don't think so." Tobias felt the air around them tighten like a noose. One twitch, one misstep, and the desert would drink their blood. "What are you gonna do?" Marshal Tobias asked quietly. "Shoot him in front of all of us." Webb didn't answer. His hand trembled slightly, jaw clenched, breath shallow, but his eyes said everything he had made his decision. "Enough," Bradley's voice rang out. He had dismounted, gun drawn, and pointed squarely at Webb's back. "Put it down, Marshal." Silence. Then click. Another gun cocked, then another, and another. 4 of the 5 deputies now stood with weapons raised not at Ayanna, but at their own commander. Only one man remained loyal to Webb Hawkins, grizzled and scar-faced with a look of a cornered predator. "You're all fools," Webb snarled. "He's a savage, a traitor. And I am the law in this territory." "Law doesn't mean murdering people to hide your crimes," Bradley said firmly. And then Ayanna did something no one expected. He began to sing, not in English, but in Apache, a deep, resonant melody that rolled like wind through canyon walls. The words were foreign, but the emotion was clear pain, loyalty, sacrifice. It wasn't just a song. It was a signal. Tobias felt it in his bones. He was calling to his people. Moments later, they came. From over the ridge, dozens of Apache warriors rode down in silence, no war cries, no weapons drawn, but their presence filled the landscape like thunderclouds. At the head of the formation rode an elderly man, his braided gray hair adorned with eagle feathers, his posture noble and unshaken. Chief Takakoda, Ayana's father. He dismounted and walked calmly toward the well eyes fixed on his son. When they embraced, a hush fell over everyone. It was sacred father and son reunited beneath the threat of death. Then the chief turned to face Webb. His voice was low and clear, his English precise. "My son tells me you came here to murder him." Webb barked. "I came here to arrest a fugitive." "A fugitive from your own corruption," the chief replied. "A man whose only crime was discovering your bloody prophet." One of the warriors stepped forward with a leather satchel. Inside, documents, letters, receipts, proof of Webb's dealings with gun runners. Tobias watched as realization spread across Webb's face, his schemes, his lies all unraveling in front of him, but cornered animals don't surrender. Webb swung his pistol not at Ayana, but at Chief Takakoda. "No," Tobias roared. He lunged. The shot fired, only one, then dust. When the air cleared, Webb lay sprawled in the dirt. His pistol had flown from his hand. Tobias knelt beside him, breathless hands scraped from the fall. The deputies swarmed in securing Webb and Hawkins with ropes. Ayana, still bleeding, walked to Tobias and placed a hand on his shoulder. His father, the chief, stepped forward. His expression had shifted not with suspicion, but with respect. He spoke in Apache. Ayana translated voice thick with emotion. He says, "From this day forward, you are our brother, for choosing truth over fear, for risking everything to save peace." Tobias stood speechless, not out of confusion, but from the weight of it. The Apache approached him one by one, touching his hand, not a handshake, but a ritual, a mark of kinship. Then the chief presented Tobias with a final gift, a ceremonial war lance adorned with eagle feathers and ancient beadwork. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said. "It has never been given to a man not born Apache until now." As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the sky in crimson and gold, peace fragile and flickering had been saved, and all because one man had offered a wounded stranger a drink of water. The reunion and the truth revealed. As the gunshot faded and the dust began to settle in the dying light, all eyes turned to the two men on the ground, Tobias Hartwell, breathless but alive, and Marshall Webb, motionless, his pistol thrown clear like a snake stripped of its fangs. Tobias pushed himself up on one elbow chest, heaving from the tackle, his eyes locked on Webb's face. That mask of fury and pride had crumbled. Now there was only shock failure and a fear he could no longer hide. 4 deputies rushed in, securing both Webb and Hawkins with ropes. No one spoke, no one helped him. Ayana, still leaning against the well, pale and bloodied, nodded once toward Tobias. Nothing was said, but the meaning was clear. Tobias hadn't just saved a life. He had preserved something far greater, the heartbeat of a fragile peace. Chief Takakoda approached Tobias. His face was lined like the canyons hardened by time and war, but his eyes held the solemn weight of judgment. He looked to his son, once then turned his gaze to the rancher who had risked everything. He spoke in Apache, deep, resonant words that sounded like the earth itself speaking. Ayana translated softly. He says, "The man who gives water to the thirsty gives life to peace itself." Before Tobias could respond, one of the warriors stepped forward with a heavy leather satchel. Inside was a carefully bound stack of documents, government-stamped papers, Webb's own handwriting records of weapon shipments and detailed payment logs. These came from the Southern cache, the chief said in crisp English. We recovered them before the traitors could burn them. Webb, even while tied, tried to rise. You people think you can. You called us savages, Ayanna interrupted, voice hard as iron. But it's you who sold war. Bradley, the young deputy, lowered his head. We trusted you, Marshal, but now I trust what I see. The chief raised the stack of documents high. We have names, routes, dates. One of your weapon smugglers was caught alive. The other two died trying to run, but not before confirming everything. Morrison's letter was just the beginning. Webb said nothing. Sweat poured from his brow like wax melting under flame. Then the chief signaled again, and two warriors brought forth a bruised man in a worn leather coat, one of the surviving arms dealers. His eyes were dark, his face broken, but his mouth told no lies. He confirmed it all. Every shipment, every meeting, every bribe. Webb's entire frame sagged like a scaffold collapsing in silence. But behind his eyes, Tobias saw something else, a flicker of madness, a last desperate flame. Webb looked up, voice gravelly. If I'm going down, I'll take someone with me. Suddenly, he lunged fast, fueled by instinct and rage. In a flash, he wrenched a pistol from the belt of a nearby deputy. This time, he didn't aim for Ayanna. He aimed for Chief Takakota. No! Ayanna shouted. Tobias didn't think. He moved. The shot rang out. Just one. But no one fell. Ayanna had thrown himself at Webb from behind, slamming into him with everything he had left. The bullet went wide, echoing into the desert sky. Webb crashed to the ground, his pistol skidding across the dust. Within seconds, the others swarmed him. Webb was disarmed this time for good. And in that moment, Tobias knew everything had almost unraveled again because of one man desperate to bury the truth with more blood. The chief stepped toward Tobias, placed both hands on the rancher's shoulders. This time he spoke directly in English, slow and clear. You are not of our blood, but you lived as if you were. You were not born a warrior, but you acted as a leader. Today, you are one of us. The Apache warriors formed a wide circle. One by one, they approached Tobias, touching his shoulder or his chest. It was no mere handshake. It was a ceremony, a rite of belonging. Ayanna stepped forward, pulling from his shirt a small carved pendant, an eagle's head etched in dark wood, worn with age and reverence. This belonged to my grandfather, Ayanna said. Today, it belongs to you. Tobias slipped the pendant over his neck, hands trembling. He had never imagined that in trying to help a dying man, he would be claimed by something larger than land or legacy. As the sun dipped low, casting the sky in molten gold, the warriors prepared to leave. But before they did, the chief handed Bradley a sealed envelope, an official dispatch from the territorial governor. All orders against Ayanna have been suspended, he said, effective immediately. Ayanna turned to Tobias one last time and clasped his hand firm and grateful. You didn't just save me, he said. You saved the peace. Tobias gave a small, tired smile. Sometimes, he said, all it takes is a drink of water, a powerful and meaningful ending. The dust had barely settled when the ceremony began. The Apache warriors formed a wide ring under the crimson sky. At its center stood Tobias Hartwell, still in his dirt-stained shirt, hands bruised, eyes wide with disbelief. What was happening felt more like a dream than anything real. Chief Takakota stepped forward, holding something long wrapped in thick leather. He unrolled it slowly, revealing a weapon unlike any Tobias had ever seen, a war lance beautifully adorned with eagle feathers, bone beads, and hand-carved patterns that shimmered faintly in the fading light. Its shaft was smooth from generations of hands. This, the chief said, lifting it with both hands, belonged to my grandfather, and to his grandfather before him. It has never left Apache blood until today. The circle of warriors bowed their heads. You gave a dying man water, Takakota continued. You gave a hunted man protection. But more than that, you gave all of us hope. And for that, you are now Apache in spirit and in bloodline of choice. He handed the lance to Tobias, who took it with reverent hands, unsure whether to bow, kneel, or cry. The warriors stepped forward, one by one, each placing a hand over Tobias's chest in a quiet gesture of acceptance of brotherhood. No more words were spoken. They didn't need to be. That night, around a shared fire on Tobias's ranch, the Apache prepared to ride. Ayana, still weak but recovering, sat beside his father, surrounded by his people once more. Tobias watched them speak in their own language, fast, musical, rich, with unspoken layers. He couldn't understand the words, but the emotion in their eyes, the lightness in their postures told him something deeper than translation ever could. Peace had returned, and he had helped bring it back. In the weeks that followed, the entire territory changed. Word of Marshal Webb's arrest spread like wildfire. His betrayal rocked every outpost and government station between Santa Fe and Fort Richardson. The evidence, Morrison's letter, the captured arms dealer's testimony. The signed documents all built a case that no court could ignore. Webb and Hawkins were put on trial in a public courtroom packed with settlers, soldiers, and tribal representatives alike. The charges were grave treason, conspiracy, corruption, attempted murder. For the first time in a long time, justice didn't wear a badge. It wore the truth. The verdict came swift. Guilty. Both men were sentenced to life in military prisons, stripped of their ranks, their pensions, and the fear they once commanded. The trial led to an even greater reckoning. A dozen other officials across the territory were quietly removed from office, their connections to the gun-running ring too dangerous to ignore. In their place came men who had fought for peace, men who understood its cost. And at the center of it all, Tobias Hartwell. He never asked for recognition, but it came anyway. Newspapers called him the rancher who stopped a war. Children sang songs about the day the Apache rode peacefully through a white man's land. Fort Richardson invited him to speak. He declined. Politicians offered him medals. He refused. But when the Apache Council officially named him Brother of the Nation, Tobias traveled days to stand beside them, there surrounded by warriors, elders, and families who once would have feared him. Tobias said, "Only this, I gave a thirsty man water. That's all. But maybe that's where peace always begins." His words were carved into stone and placed at the entrance of the new Apache Western Alliance building, built in a neutral valley where chiefs and generals could meet as equals. The peace treaty was renewed not just between the Apache and the U.S. government, but expanded to include the southern tribes. For the first time in decades, the entire territory stood unified. As for Tobias, life didn't go back to normal. It became something better. He rebuilt his barn with the help of Apache carpenters. He planted a new apple orchard with seeds gifted by Takakota's people. Each spring, children from both settler and tribal families visited his ranch where Tobias taught them how to ride horses, mend fences, and more than anything, listen. Ayana visited often, sometimes with warriors, sometimes alone. Each time he brought stories, songs, and the laughter of old friends who had bled together. They never called each other hero or savior. They simply called each other brother. And the lance Tobias didn't hang it on a wall. He didn't mount it above a fireplace. Instead, he carried it once each year to the ridge where it all began. He stood there at sunset, facing the wind, remembering the moment when kindness had been stronger than fear, when truth had triumphed over bullets, when a man could be more than the world told him to be. The lesson: a cup of water that changed the world. In a world hardened by dust, blood, and betrayal, the story of Tobias Hartwell and Ayanna stands as a rare, radiant truth. It begins not with grand declarations or sweeping battles, but with something painfully simple: a wounded man, a dusty well, and a stranger's hand that chose mercy over fear. From that single moment, one man offering another a drink of water rippled consequences far beyond what either could have imagined. What followed was not just a tale of action and survival. It was a testament to the power of compassion in the most unlikely places, and from it we draw lessons that echo across generations. 1. Compassion is courage in disguise. Tobias lived in a time and place where showing kindness to a native warrior was not only frowned upon, it was considered treason. His neighbors would have shot Ayanna on sight. They would have praised Tobias for protecting his land if he had pulled the trigger. But he didn't, because sometimes doing the right thing means doing the dangerous thing. It means standing alone not for glory or reward, but because your conscience won't let you do anything else. Compassion, in its rawest form, is bravery. It's easy to hate what we don't understand. But to help a man your world calls an enemy, especially when it puts your own life at risk, is to live by a higher truth. 2. Mercy doesn't require permission. No law told Tobias to help Ayanna. No one would have blamed him if he walked away. But he didn't ask for approval. He simply acted. In doing so, he proved that morality is not about following rules. It's about listening to your soul when no one else will. When society screams vengeance, mercy must whisper louder. Tobias didn't need a title, a badge, or a pulpit. He had a bucket of water, a clear conscience, and the courage to risk both. And with that, he redefined what justice could look like. 3. One act can unravel generations of hate. By saving Ayanna, Tobias didn't just help a wounded man. He preserved a fragile peace treaty, exposed a deadly conspiracy, and forced a reckoning with the truth. That's the astonishing thing about kindness. It multiplies. One cup of water revealed the corruption of a marshal. It empowered brave deputies to stand for justice. It brought tribes and settlers to the same table. And, in the end, it turned a simple rancher into a symbol not of heroism in the traditional sense, but of humanity. If hate is taught, then perhaps compassion is remembered. And in Tobias's actions, entire communities were reminded that we are all more alike than we admit. 4. Brotherhood is chosen, not born. Tobias was not born Apache. He didn't speak their language or share their blood. But when he stood between Ayanna and a bullet, not once, but twice, he earned something deeper than tribal membership. He earned brotherhood. True brotherhood transcends skin border and background. It is built on sacrifice, on shared pain, on choices made when no one is watching. In return for his selfless acts, Tobias wasn't just accepted, he was honored with an ancestral war lance, a title, and something no empire could give belonging. 5. Peace is fragile and worth everything. This story isn't just about the evils of war or the rot of corruption. It is about the delicate nature of peace, how it balances on the smallest acts and can be shattered with a single lie. Tobias learned that peace doesn't come from treaties signed on parchment. It is born in the daily decisions ordinary people make when confronted with fear, prejudice, and pressure. It's in how we treat a stranger, how we speak when we see injustice, how we choose between silence and truth. Peace requires protectors, not warriors with guns, but men and women with open hands and open hearts. 6. History is not changed by grand gestures, but small mercies. No one will remember Tobias for owning the largest ranch or being the best shot, but he will be remembered across generations for offering a stranger a drink of water. In that moment, he defied history. He stepped outside the cycle of hatred and wrote a new chapter. His act was not celebrated by fanfare. It did not trend on headlines. But it mattered, because it proved that the world changes not with violence, not with dominance, but with compassion. With a hand extended when others raise fists. With water offered when others offer fire. The final lesson. We often ask what it takes to fix a broken world. We look to politicians, generals, revolutions. But maybe it doesn't start there. Maybe it starts with one person seeing another not as enemy or other, but simply as human. Maybe it starts with a rancher, a well, and a cup of water, because sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. And in doing so, we change ourselves.